The intake form asked me to list prior medical conditions. I wrote, fractured left radius, healed, frostbite, 3 toes, resolved, crush injury, lower thoracic, resolved, puncture, wound, right thigh, repaired in the field. The form was designed to accept 2 entries per category. I used the overflow box. They put me in the medical bay on the 3rd day. I want to be precise about the sequence of events. People ask me later, much later. Once the report circulates, whether I was angry. I was not angry. Anger would have required surprise, and nothing that happened in that bay surprised me after the first hour. I had spent 11 years as a wilderness trauma medic on 3 continents, and before that 2 years in an orbital triage unit on a station that was understaffed by 40% and overfull of people who had been exposed to things that Earth hospitals did not have reference protocols for. By the time I arrived at the academy, I had a working familiarity with pain, equipment failure, with systems that were confident they understood a problem, and were wrong, and with the particular institutional momentum that keeps a process running, long past the moment when a smarter observer would have stopped it. The Vithrak Orbital Academy Medical Assessment Center occupied a full ring of the station's 4th level. It was clean in the way that only places without windows can be clean. White surfaces, calibrated air, light that came from everywhere and cast no shadows. Physician instructor Soveth met me at the intake threshold. She was tall, pale green, secondary eyelids that moved horizontally when she was concentrating. She concentrated on my file for a long time. Biometric baseline is flagging, she said. I was told it was a calibration issue. We recalibrated. The flags remained. She handed the data pad to a technician without looking at it. You'll begin the assessment protocol today. That was how it started. The first chamber was the pressure suite. It was designed, as best I could understand from the intake sheet, test cardiovascular response to atmospheric stress. They ran it at pressures that would have caused discomfort in a Vithrak cadet, something in the range of what you'd feel at depth, maybe 30 meters, maybe a little more. They watched from behind the observation glass. I sat on the bench and thought about a river crossing I'd done in the Pamirs with a broken pack frame and 30 kilos of medical supplies. That had been colder. The pressure was fine. Soveth made a note. The second test was thermal, cold immersion, not full immersion. A bath chair arrangement that dropped my core temperature over 40 minutes, while the monitoring system tracked my response curves. Alien cadets. I gathered from the orientation materials, experienced something like controlled shutdown when their temperature dropped past a certain threshold. The system expected to see that. It was looking for the curve to break. My curve didn't break. I have spent nights at altitude where the math said I should have been in trouble and wasn't, and I have helped pull people out of mountain rivers in January and had to explain to them, quietly, that their hands would feel like that for another hour, and then they wouldn't. The cold immersion chair was 40 minutes. It felt like 40 minutes. Soveth made another note. The third test took longer to set up. I sat in the bay and watched a technician named Orvith calibrate a device I didn't have a name for. He worked carefully, which I respected. He apologized twice for the wait, which I didn't expect. What does this one measure? I asked. Neurological threshold response. Pain tolerance and signal propagation. He paused. You can request sedation. I'm fine. He looked at me the way people look at someone who has said something they can't immediately categorize. Then he finished the calibration. I know what I have a tolerance for, and I know why I have it. It is not a virtue. It is the residue of a job. When you work long enough in conditions where pain is a data point rather than a crisis, when you stop asking yourself whether something hurts and asking what the pain is telling you about the mechanism of injury, you develop an ability to hold the two things separate, the sensation and the response. The test ran in 3 escalating stages. Between the second and third, I asked Orvith what the upper threshold was, not because I was concerned, but because I had my own calibration habits and liked to know the range I was working in. He told me the number. I nodded. It was a number I had seen in a field context once in an accident involving a downed power line and a man who did not survive. I did not say that. The third stage ran. The neurological threshold test was looking for the response. It found a much smaller one than it expected. I watched the technician's secondary eyelids flicker. Sovith came in from the observation gallery. The readings are inconsistent with your file. Readings specifically. All of them. She set the data pad on the tray beside me. The system has run 4 assessments, returning the same result each time. What result? No primary pathology identified. She said it. The way someone says a sentence that they can hear is wrong but cannot find the error in. But the flags remain. The intake biometrics were clear. The system was calibrated correctly. These readings should not be possible without significant underlying pathology. I looked at the data pad. I am not a physician, but I have read enough intake forms and diagnostic summaries to understand the shape of a report, and the shape of this one was unusual. Every category had a value. None of the values were in the flagged zones. The system had run its full protocol and come back empty-handed. What flags triggered on intake? I asked. She read them out. Sol's baseline 300% above Vethrac norm. Resting muscle density inconsistent with non-combat classification. Bone density significantly above academy average. Cardiovascular response curves outside known parameters. Neurological signal propagation speed. Anomalous. I thought about that for a moment. Those are not pathologies, I said. Sovith looked at me. The system flagged them because they don't match your baseline reference population, I said. But they're not outside normal range for me. They're normal for the job I came from. The horizontal eyelids moved. The intake calibration was set to Vethrac physiological parameters, I said. Your ranges. Not mine. There was a silence that had a particular quality to it. The kind of silence that happens when a system, not a machine, a room, a set of people and processes and assumptions, arrives at the edge of its own framework and finds nothing underneath. Orvith had stopped moving. The 2 technicians at the far station had stopped moving. Sovith held the data pad in both hands and did not set it down and did not read from it. I was not trying to embarrass anyone. I want to be clear about that. I was trying to get out of the medical bay, which had now consumed 3 days of my orientation week, and go to the simulation labs, where I was supposed to be, and where I had been told the assessment track for emergency field surgery was beginning. Without me, that was all I wanted. I was not making a point. The point was simply there, visible to everyone in the room, and I did not see the value in pretending otherwise. Sovith set the data pad down. She pulled up a different screen, the baseline reference library, Vethrac parameters, Dravaki parameters, Saluvith parameters, a list of species the system had been trained on, going back from what I could see, about 60 years of academy records. At the bottom of the list there was a category marked, pending integration. Under it, 1 entry. It had my species designation and a status code I didn't know. She read the status code aloud. I found out later it meant insufficient data for baseline construction. She looked at me. I looked at the data pad. Nobody said anything. After a while, Orvith quietly began shutting down the thermal equipment. He did it the way you shut down equipment that isn't going to be used again. Today, not the way you shut it down temporarily. The 2 technicians at the far station did the same, unhurrying, not making eye contact with each other or with anyone else in the room. Sovith wrote something in the file. I did not see what she wrote. She handed me a clearance slip and told me the simulation labs were on the 7th level, Ring C, and that orientation had already begun, but they would log me as delayed for medical review. I took the slip. I left the bay. Clearance slip had a code printed in upper right corner. When I checked it later against the Academy's administrative glossary, I found the translation. It read in Vethrac notation, status unrestricted, baseline profile pending species integration. I kept it. It seemed like the kind of thing worth keeping.